The scorching sun beat down on the dusty streets of Redemption Gulch, a town that had forgotten the meaning of its name long ago. A lone, pregnant woman, Abigail Rose, clutched her swollen belly, her eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. She was searching for a ghost, a man who had left her with nothing but a broken heart and a secret. But destiny had a different plan. In a heartbeat, the dusty tranquility shattered into a hail of bullets, and as Abigail threw herself in front of a crippled cowboy's young son, a searing pain ripped through her side. She had taken a bullet meant for the boy, a selfless act that would unravel a web of lies and reveal a truth that would shake the very foundations of Redemption Gulch. The boy she saved was the heir to the most powerful man in the territory, the iron-fisted sheriff, a man she knew all too well. The dust in Redemption Gulch had a memory. It clung to the weathered facades of the saloon and the general store, a silent testament to the countless brawls, shattered dreams, and hurried departures that defined the town. It was a place where hope came to die, and secrets were buried deeper than the graves in the sun-scorched cemetery. For Abigail Rose, it was the end of a long and desperate road. Her journey had started months ago, a naive girl from a small town in the east chasing after a handsome drifter named Jasper Cole. He had whispered promises of a new life, a home in the untamed West, a future filled with love and prosperity. But Jasper's promises were as empty as his pockets. He had vanished one morning, leaving Abigail with a growing belly and a heart fractured into 1,000 pieces. Her search for him had led her through one dusty, forgotten town after another, until her last few coins brought her to Redemption Gulch. She clutched the worn photograph in her hand, its edges soft and frayed. It was the only likeness she had of Jasper, his charming smile, a cruel mockery of her current predicament. Her savings were gone, her spirit worn thin. The weight of her unborn child was a constant reminder of her folly, a heavy burden under the relentless Arizona sun. As she scanned the faces of the men loitering outside the saloon, a flicker of hope, as faint as a dying ember, ignited within her. A man with a familiar swagger, a glint of mischief in his eyes, leaned against a hitching post. It wasn't Jasper, but he had the same careless air, the same predatory charm. Maybe he knew him. Maybe he had seen him. Summoning the last of her courage, Abigail straightened her worn dress and approached the man. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm looking for someone, a man named Jasper Cole. Have you seen him?" The man whose name she would later learn was Black Bart Corrigan, a notorious outlaw with a price on his head, looked her up and down, a lecherous grin spreading across his face. "Jasper Cole, you say? Can't say I have. But a pretty little thing like you shouldn't be wandering around these parts alone." His words sent a shiver down her spine, a cold premonition that prickled her skin. She took a step back, her hand instinctively going to her belly. I have to find him. He's the father of my child." Black Bart's grin widened. "Is that so? Well, maybe I can help you forget all about him." He reached out to grab her arm, his touch rough and unwelcome. "Let go of me," Abigail cried, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and indignation. Her cry was a spark in a tinderbox. It drew the attention of a man sitting on a nearby porch, a man who was the antithesis of Black Bart in every way. This was Eli Vance, a former gunslinger whose reputation had once echoed through the territory. But those days were long gone. A stray bullet in a long-forgotten feud had left him with a crippled leg and a life of quiet desperation. He now earned a meager living as a blacksmith, his powerful hands, once so deadly with a Colt, now shaping iron and steel. Next to him sat his son, a boy of about 10, named Cody. The boy was the mirror image of his father, with the same piercing blue eyes and a quiet intensity that belied his age. He was Eli's world, the one reason he clung to life in this God-forsaken town. Eli had seen the exchange between Abigail and Black Bart, and his jaw tightened. He knew Black Bart's reputation, and he knew the kind of man he was. He had tried to stay out of trouble since his injury, to live a peaceful life for his son's sake. But he couldn't stand by and watch a pregnant woman be harassed. He reached for the worn cane that rested against his chair and slowly, painfully pulled himself to his feet. "Leave the lady alone." "Bart," he said, his voice low and steady, but with an undercurrent of steel that made Black Bart pause. Black Bart turned to face Eli, his eyes narrowing. Well, well, if it ain't the crippled crow." He sneered, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. "What's it to you, Vance? You gonna challenge me to a duel? You can't even stand up straight." Eli's hand tightened on his cane. He knew he was no match for Black Bart in a fair fight, not anymore. But he also knew that some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant certain death. "I said leave her alone." He repeated, his voice colder this time. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that silenced the usual din of the town. People stopped what they were doing, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. This was the kind of confrontation that Redemption Gulch thrived on, a spectacle of violence that was as much a part of its daily life as the rising and setting of the sun. Cody, sensing the imminent danger, stood up and moved closer to his father, his small hand clutching Eli's trousers. "Pa," he whispered, his voice filled with fear. Eli placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes never leaving Black Bart. "It's all right, son," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Go inside." But it was too late. Black Bart, fueled by cheap whiskey and a lifetime of cruelty, drew his pistol. His movements were a blur, a deadly dance of practiced violence. He wasn't aiming for Eli. He was aiming for the boy. It was a cowardly act, a way to inflict the ultimate pain on his old rival. Time seemed to slow down. Abigail saw the glint of the gun, the cruel smile on Black Bart's face, the look of terror in the boy's eyes. In that split second, her maternal instincts, the fierce protective love for her own unborn child, took over. She didn't think. She just acted. With a cry that was a mixture of defiance and despair, she threw herself in front of Cody, her body shielding him from the bullet. The world exploded in a symphony of pain. A searing, white-hot agony ripped through her side, stealing her breath and sending her crumpling to the dusty ground. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the look of pure, unadulterated hatred on Eli's face as he lunged at Black Bart, his cane swinging like a club. The last thing she heard was the boy's frantic cry, "Pa, no!" And then there was only silence. A silence that was heavier, more profound than the dust that settled over her still form. The world returned to Abigail in fragments of pain and hushed voices. She was lying on a soft bed, the scent of lavender and lye soap filling her nostrils. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from her side, a constant reminder of the bullet that had torn through her flesh. She tried to move, but a sharp, stabbing pain pinned her to the mattress. A woman's voice, gentle and soothing, broke through the fog of her consciousness. Easy now, dear. You've been through quite an ordeal. Abigail's eyes fluttered open to see a woman with kind, weathered features and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. This was Martha, the town's midwife and healer, a woman whose hands had brought new life into the world and eased the passing of the old. Where am I?" Abigail whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "You're in my home," Martha said, dabbing Abigail's forehead with a cool, damp cloth. "Eli Vance brought you here. You saved his boy's life, you know. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen." The memory of the shooting came rushing back, a torrent of fear and adrenaline. "The boy, Cody, is he all right?" "He's fine," Martha assured her. "Not a scratch on him, thanks to you." A wave of relief washed over Abigail, so powerful it almost made her weep. She had acted on instinct, a primal urge to protect the innocent. She didn't regret it, even with the searing pain in her side. "And my baby?" she asked, her voice trembling. Martha's expression softened with sympathy. "The bullet went clean through. It missed the baby, praise the Lord. But you lost a lot of blood. You're weak, and you'll need to stay in bed for a while. The next few days will be crucial." Abigail closed her eyes, a silent prayer of thanks on her lips. Her baby was safe. That was all that mattered. She spent the next few days in a hazy state, drifting in and out of consciousness. Martha tended to her with a gentle, practiced hand, changing her bandages, feeding her broth, and keeping a watchful eye on her fever. Eli visited every day, his face a mask of guilt and gratitude. He would sit by her bedside for hours, his gnarled hands clasped tightly in his lap, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked her over and over again. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said. One afternoon, his voice choked with unshed tears. "You saved my son. You saved my world." Abigail managed a weak smile. "I'm just glad he's safe," she said. "He's a good boy." "He is," Eli agreed, his eyes shining with paternal pride. "He's all I have left." Through their quiet conversations, Abigail learned more about Eli and his son. He told her about his past as a gunslinger, the life he had left behind to raise Cody. He spoke of his late wife, Rebecca, who had died in childbirth, leaving him with a broken heart and a newborn son to care for. He painted a picture of a man who had been dealt a cruel hand by fate, a man who was trying his best to navigate a world that had taken everything from him. Cody also visited her, his initial shyness giving way to a quiet curiosity. He would bring her wildflowers he had picked in the meadow behind the blacksmith shop, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted tones of the sick room. He would sit on a stool by her bed and tell her about his day, his childish chatter, a welcome distraction from the pain and monotony. As the days turned into weeks, Abigail slowly began to regain her strength. The wound in her side started to heal, the pain receding to a dull ache. She was able to sit up in bed and then, with Martha's help, to take a few faltering steps around the room. One afternoon, as Martha was changing her bandage, Abigail noticed a small, faded tattoo on the older woman's wrist, a delicate rendering of a bluebird. "That's a beautiful tattoo," Abigail said, tracing the outline with her finger. Martha smiled, a sad, distant look in her eyes. "It was a gift from my daughter," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She had one just like it." "Had?" Abigail asked gently. Martha's eyes filled with tears. "She died a few years back," she said, her voice thick with grief. "Childbirth. The baby didn't make it either." Abigail's heart ached for the woman who had shown her So much kindness. "I'm so sorry," she said, her own eyes welling up with tears. Martha quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a forced smile on her face. "It was a long time ago," she said, her voice brittle. "But some things, you never get over." The conversation left a deep impression on Abigail. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the ever-present shadow of death that loomed over the untamed West. It also made her think about her own child, the little life growing inside her. She was determined to give her baby a better life, a life free from the violence and uncertainty that had plagued her own. As her strength returned, so did her worries about the future. She had no money, no home, and a baby on the way. She couldn't stay with Martha forever. The thought of being on her own again, of having to face the world with a newborn child, filled her with a sense of dread. One evening, as Eli was getting ready to leave, Abigail summoned the courage to ask him a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Eli," she began, her voice hesitant, "what happened to Black Bart?" Eli's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "He's gone," he said, his voice flat and cold. "He won't be bothering anyone ever again." Abigail didn't press for details. She didn't need to. The look in Eli's eyes told her everything she needed to know. She had a feeling that Black Bart had met his end at the hands of the crippled blacksmith, a final act of vengeance for the man who had almost taken his son's life. The news brought her a sense of relief, but also a renewed sense of unease. Redemption Gulch was a dangerous place, a town where violence was a way of life. She knew she couldn't stay here. She had to leave for her baby's sake. But where would she go? What would she do? The questions swirled in her mind, a tangled web of uncertainty and fear. It was Cody who unwittingly provided her with an answer. He came to visit her one afternoon, his face alight with excitement. He was holding a small, carved wooden horse, a gift from his father. "Look what Pa made me," he said, holding it out for her to see. Abigail admired the horse, its smooth, polished wood, a testament to Eli's skill as a craftsman. "It's beautiful, Cody," she said. As she turned the horse over in her hands, her eyes fell on a small, intricate carving on its underside, a symbol she had seen before. It was a star, intertwined with a snake. Her blood ran cold. She had seen that same symbol before, on a silver locket that Jasper had always worn around his neck. He had told her it was a family crest, a symbol of his heritage. "Cody," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "where did your father get this design?" Cody shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "He's always carved it on my toys. He says it's a secret." A million questions flooded Abigail's mind. Was it a coincidence? Or was there a connection between Jasper and Eli? Could it be possible that the man who had shown her so much kindness was somehow connected to the man who had broken her heart? The thought was too fantastic to believe, yet too persistent to ignore. She had to know the truth. She had to find out who Eli Vance really was. That evening, after Cody had gone home, Abigail asked Martha about Eli's late wife, Rebecca. "What was she like?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Martha sighed, a fond smile on her face. "Rebecca was a beautiful soul," she said, "spirited and kind. She came to town with her brother, a charming but reckless young man named Jasper. He left town shortly after Rebecca's death, and we never saw him again." The name hit Abigail like a physical blow. Jasper, Rebecca's brother, Eli's brother-in-law. It couldn't be Jasper. she repeated, her voice trembling. Jasper Cole. Martha's eyes widened in surprise. Why, yes, she said. That was his name. Did you know him? Abigail couldn't speak. The room started to spin, the air thick and suffocating. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a picture that was both horrifying and unbelievable. Jasper Cole, the father of her child, was Eli's brother-in-law, and Cody, the boy she had saved, was his nephew. But there was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, another secret that lay buried in the dusty past of Redemption Gulch. A secret that would be revealed in the most unexpected of ways. A few days later, the sheriff of the neighboring county, a man named Marcus Thorne, rode into town. He was a tall, imposing figure with a stern face and cold, calculating eyes. He was known for his ruthless efficiency, a man who always got his man dead or alive. He went straight to Martha's house, his spurs clinking on the wooden porch. He was looking for Eli Vance. I have a warrant for his arrest, he announced, his voice booming through the small house. Martha stood her ground, her arms crossed over her chest. On what charge? She demanded. Murder, the sheriff said, his eyes glinting with a cold, hard light. The murder of Black Bart Corrigan. Abigail's heart stopped. She knew Eli had killed Black Bart, but she had never imagined he would be arrested for it. In a town like Redemption Gulch, killing a man like Black Bart was usually considered a public service. Eli, who had been in the other room, came out to face the sheriff. I did what I had to do, he said, his voice calm and steady. He was going to kill my son. That's for the judge to decide, the sheriff said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. But before he could put them on, Abigail stepped forward. You can't arrest him, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. He's not the one you should be looking for. The sheriff turned to her, a look of annoyance on his face. And who are you? He asked. My name is Abigail Rose, she said, her eyes blazing with defiance. And I know who really killed Black Bart. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, a skeptical smile on his lips. And who might that be? He asked. Abigail took a deep breath. It was the boy's father, she said, her voice clear and strong. The sheriff's smile vanished. The boy's father is dead, he said, his voice cold and flat. He died 10 years ago. No, Abigail said, shaking her head. He's alive, and he's here in Redemption Gulch. The sheriff stared at her, a look of disbelief on his face. Who are you talking about? He asked. Abigail pointed a trembling finger at Eli. He's not Cody's father, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. He's his uncle. The room fell silent. The only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Eli's face was a mask of shock and confusion. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, a flicker of understanding in their depths. And who is the boy's father? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Abigail looked out at the sheriff, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and defiance. The boy's father, she said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, is you. The revelation hung in the air, a bombshell that shattered the fragile peace of the sick room. Sheriff Marcus Thorne, the man who represented law and order in the territory, the man who had come to arrest Eli for murder, was Cody's father. The truth buried for 10 long years had finally come to light, and it would change the lives of everyone in Redemption Gulch forever. The silence in Martha's small house was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Sheriff Thorne stared at Abigail, his face a granite mask of disbelief. The words she had spoken seemed to echo in the stillness, a preposterous accusation that hung in the air like gun smoke. That's impossible, Thorne said, his voice a low growl. Rebecca's child died with her. No, Abigail insisted, her own voice gaining strength from the conviction of her words. Her child lived. Her brother Jasper, he told me. He was there. Eli, who had been frozen in shock, finally found his voice. Jasper, he rasped, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. What does Jasper have to do with this? Abigail's gaze softened as she looked at the crippled blacksmith, the man who had shown her nothing but kindness. The truth would hurt him, she knew, but it had to be told. Jasper was Rebecca's brother, she explained, her voice gentle. He was with her when she died. He told me that Rebecca made him promise to take the baby and run to keep him safe from his father. Every eye in the room turned to Sheriff Thorne. The implications of Abigail's words were monstrous. Why would a mother want her child to be hidden from his own father? Thorne's composure finally cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. That's a lie, he snapped. A fabrication concocted by a desperate woman. What proof do you have? The locket, Abigail said, her voice unwavering. Jasper wore a locket with a family crest, a star intertwined with a snake. He said it was his heritage. Cody has the same symbol carved on his toys. It's your family crest, isn't it? Sheriff Thorne's face went pale. The star and the serpent. The crest of the Thorne family, a symbol of a lineage that stretched back for generations, a lineage he had fought so hard to protect. He took a step towards Abigail, his hand reaching for her arm. "Where is Jasper?" he demanded, his voice a dangerous whisper. Abigail flinched but held her ground. "He's gone," she said, her voice filled with a bitterness that surprised even herself. "He left me just like he left everyone else. He's a coward and a liar." The sheriff's eyes burned with an intensity that made Abigail's blood run cold. He wasn't just looking for a man. He was looking for a ghost, a phantom, who held the key to a past he had tried so desperately to bury. He turned his gaze on Eli, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and a dawning, terrible realization. "You knew," he said, his voice flat and accusatory. "All these years you knew." Eli shook his head, his face a picture of bewildered denial. "No," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I swear on my wife's grave, I didn't know. Jasper told me the baby died. He brought me a small, empty coffin. We buried it next to Rebecca." The depth of Jasper's betrayal was staggering. He had not only stolen his own nephew, but he had also subjected his brother-in-law to a decade of unnecessary grief. Cody, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, his small face a mask of confusion and fear, finally spoke. "Pa," he whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at Eli. "You're not my pa." The boy's question was a dagger in Eli's heart. He knelt, his crippled leg protesting in pain, and pulled the boy into his arms. "I'm your pa, in every way that matters, Cody," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I raised you. I love you. Nothing will ever change that." But the world had been turned upside down. The man Cody had always known as his father was his uncle, and the stern, imposing stranger who had come to arrest his uncle was his biological father. Sheriff Thorne watched the scene with a mixture of emotions warring on his face. He had come to Redemption Gulch to enforce the law, to arrest a murderer. But he had stumbled upon a truth that threatened to unravel his carefully constructed life. He had loved Rebecca. He had loved her with the passion that had bordered on obsession. But he had also been a man consumed by ambition, a man who would let nothing stand in his way. He had been on the verge of a major political appointment, a position that would have secured his place among the territory's elite. But a scandal, a rumor of a secret child, would have ruined him. He had made a choice, a terrible, unforgivable choice. He had given Jasper a pouch of gold and told him to disappear with the baby, to never return. He had convinced himself that it was for the best, that the child would be better off away from the harsh glare of public life. He had told himself that he was protecting his family's name, his future. But in reality, he had been protecting himself. And now, 10 years later, his past had come back to haunt him. The child he had abandoned was standing before him, a living, breathing testament to his cowardice. He looked at Cody, at the boy's wide, innocent eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something he had thought long dead regret. He made a decision. He holstered his pistol and turned to Eli. "The warrant for your arrest is withdrawn," he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority. "For now." He then turned his attention to Abigail, his eyes filled with a new, unsettling intensity. "I need to find Jasper," he said. "He has a lot to answer for." He turned and strode out of the house, leaving a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions in his wake. The revelation of Cody's true parentage sent shockwaves through Redemption Gulch. The news spread like wildfire, fueled by gossip and speculation. The townsfolk who had once pitied the crippled blacksmith now looked at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He was the man who had raised the sheriff's son, the man who had kept the secret for 10 long years. For Eli, the revelation was a double-edged sword. He was relieved to be free from the threat of arrest, but his heart ached for Cody. The boy was confused and withdrawn, struggling to come to terms with the fact that his life had been built on a lie. Abigail, too, was struggling. She was no closer to finding Jasper, and her future was more uncertain than ever. She was a woman with a tarnished reputation, a pregnant woman who had taken a bullet to save the sheriff's son. She was a hero to some, a home wrecker to others. She found an unlikely ally in Martha, who took her under her wing and protected her from the prying eyes and wagging tongues of the town. "Don't you pay them no mind," Martha would say, her voice firm. "You did the right thing. You brought the truth to light." But the truth was a heavy burden to bear. It had torn a family apart and exposed the dark underbelly of a man who was supposed to be a symbol of justice. Sheriff Thorne became a man obsessed. He sent out deputies to every corner of the territory, offering a handsome reward for any information leading to the capture of Jasper Cole. He was determined to find the man who had betrayed him, the man who held the key to his past. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile truce settled over Redemption Gulch. Eli continued to work in his blacksmith shop, his hammer blows echoing through the town, a steady rhythm in a world that had been thrown off kilter. Cody slowly began to accept his new reality, his bond with Eli deepening even as he struggled to understand his connection to the stern, distant man who was his biological father. Abigail, her belly growing with each passing day, found a semblance of peace in Martha's quiet home. She helped the old woman with her chores, her hands once soft and delicate, now calloused and strong. She was no longer the naive girl who had arrived in Redemption Gulch months ago. She was a woman who had faced death and emerged stronger, a woman who was determined to create a safe and loving home for her child. But the peace was short-lived. A storm was brewing on the horizon, a storm that would be unleashed by the return of a ghost from the past. One evening, As a storm raged outside, a lone rider, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, rode into town. He dismounted in front of the saloon, his movements fluid and confident. He pushed open the swinging doors and stepped inside, the room falling silent as all eyes turned to him. He removed his hat, revealing a face that was both handsome and cruel, a face that was instantly recognizable to the few who had known him. It was Jasper Cole, and he hadn't come back to Redemption Gulch for a friendly reunion. He had come back for his son, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get him. The stage was set for a final deadly confrontation, a showdown that would determine the fate of Cody, the future of Redemption Gulch, and the soul of a man who had been living a lie for far too long. Jasper Cole's return to Redemption Gulch was like a lit match tossed into a powder keg. The news of his arrival spread through the town with the speed of a prairie fire, igniting a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a morbid sense of anticipation. The ghost of the past had materialized, and everyone knew that a final bloody act was about to unfold. He made his way to the saloon, not with the furtive steps of a wanted man, but with the arrogant swagger of someone who believed he held all the cards. He was no longer the charming but penniless drifter who had wooed Abigail with empty promises. He was dressed in fine clothes, a silver-mounted Colt holstered at his hip, his pockets lined with the gold he had received from Sheriff Thorne all those years ago. He ordered a bottle of the finest whiskey and sat at a corner table, his eyes scanning the room, a smirk playing on his lips. He was a man who enjoyed being the center of attention, a man who thrived on chaos. It didn't take long for the news to reach Eli. He was in his workshop, the rhythmic clang of his hammer against the anvil, a futile attempt to drown out the turmoil in his own heart. A young boy, breathless and wide-eyed, burst in with the news. "It's him, Mr. Vance. It's Jasper Cole. He's at the saloon." Eli's hammer fell silent. A cold dread, colder than the iron he worked with, gripped him. He had known this day would come. He had known that Jasper's treachery would eventually catch up with them all. He reached for his cane, his hand trembling slightly. He was no longer a gunslinger, but he was still a father, and he would protect his son, no matter the cost. He found Sheriff Thorne already at the saloon, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol, his face a thunderous mask of rage. The two men, bound by a shared past and a mutual hatred for the man sitting at the corner table, stood side by side, a silent, unholy alliance. Jasper Thorne said, his voice a low growl that cut through the silence of the saloon. Jasper looked up, a slow, insolent smile spreading across his face. "Marcus," he said, his voice laced with mock cordiality. "Fancy seeing you here. And Eli, my dear brother-in-law, you're looking old. What do you want?" Jasper, Eli asked, his voice tight with suppressed fury. Jasper took a long, slow sip of his whiskey. "I've come for what's mine," he said, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "I've come for my son." "He's not your son," Thorne snapped. "You gave up that right when you took my money and ran." Jasper laughed, a harsh, grating sound that set everyone's teeth on edge. "Your money? You mean the pittance you gave me to disappear? That was a long time ago, Marcus. Things have changed. I've come to claim my rightful place as Cody's father." "You'll have to kill me first," Eli said, his voice a low, steady promise. Jasper's smile widened. "That can be arranged," he said, his hand moving towards his gun. But before he could draw, Abigail's voice cut through the tension. "Jasper!" She stood at the entrance of the saloon, her pregnant belly a stark symbol of his betrayal. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a righteous fire. Jasper's smile faltered. He hadn't expected to see her. He had left her behind, another conquest, in a long line of broken hearts. "Abigail," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What are you doing here? I came to find you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I came to make you take responsibility for your child." Jasper's eyes flickered to her belly, a look of disgust on his face. "That's not my child," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "You were nothing but a foolish girl who was easy to please." Abigail's heart shattered. She had known he was a liar and a coward, but she had never imagined he could be so cruel. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. It was in that moment that a plan, a desperate, reckless gamble formed in her mind. She had one last card to play, one last secret to reveal. "You're right, Jasper," she said, her voice suddenly calm, almost serene. "This child isn't yours. But you know who the father is, don't you?" Jasper's eyes narrowed. He didn't know what she was playing at, but he didn't like it. Abigail's gaze shifted to Sheriff Thorne, a silent, desperate plea in her eyes. She was about to tell a lie that could either save them all or get them killed. "The father of my child," she announced, her voice ringing through the silent saloon, "is Sheriff Marcus Thorne." The bombshell exploded in the crowded room, sending shockwaves of disbelief and outrage through the assembled crowd. Thorne's face went white with shock. Eli stared at her, his jaw agape. Jasper was the only one who seemed to understand. He looked from Abigail to Thorne, a slow, cunning smile spreading across his face. He saw the flicker of hesitation in the sheriff's eyes, the dawning realization of the trap that had been set for him. Well, Marcus Jasper," said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "It seems you've been a busy man. Another secret child? You really should be more careful." Thorne was caught in a web of his own making. If he denied Abigail's claim, he would be branding her a liar and a woman of loose morals, a reputation that would be difficult to shed in a town like Redemption Gulch. But if he confirmed her story, he would be admitting to yet another act of infidelity, another secret that could destroy his career. He looked at Abigail, at the desperate hope in her eyes, at the unborn child that was a symbol of her innocence. And he made a choice. He took a step forward and put a protective arm around Abigail's shoulders. "Yes," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "I am the father of her child, and I will not have you or anyone else disrespecting the mother of my son." Jasper's smile vanished. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted. He had come to Redemption Gulch expecting to find a broken, desperate woman. But he had found a woman who was stronger than he could have ever imagined, a woman who had turned his own treachery against him. He was a man, cornered a man with nothing left to lose. And a man like that is the most dangerous man of all. With a roar of rage, he drew his pistol. But he wasn't aiming for Thorne or Eli. He was aiming for Abigail. In that split second, two shots rang out almost simultaneously. The first came from Eli's derringer, a small concealable pistol he had kept hidden in his coat. The second came from Thorne's Colt, a thunderous roar that echoed through the saloon. Jasper staggered back, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down at the two red blossoms that had bloomed on his chest. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle of blood escaped his lips. He fell to the floor, his eyes wide and vacant, his reign of terror finally at an end. The saloon erupted in chaos. Men shouted and scrambled for cover, but in the center of the storm, there was a strange, surreal calm. Eli stood over Jasper's body, his derringer smoking in his hand. Thorn stood next to him, his coat still raised his face, a mask of grim satisfaction. And Abigail stood between them, her hand on her belly, a silent prayer of thanks on her lips. The ghost of the past was gone. The nightmare was finally over. But the future was still an unwritten page, a new chapter waiting to be penned in the dusty, blood-soaked history of Redemption Gulch. The death of Jasper Cole was more than just the end of a man. It was the closing of a dark and painful chapter in the lives of everyone he had touched. The silence that followed the gunshots was a heavy, pregnant pause, a moment of reckoning before the dawn of a new and uncertain day. Sheriff Thorn was the first to break the silence. He holstered his pistol and knelt beside Jasper's body, his face unreadable. He had spent a decade consumed by the secret of his abandoned son, a secret that had been guarded by the very man now lying dead at his feet. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a weary resignation. He looked up at Eli, the man who had raised his son, the man who had every right to hate him. "He was your brother-in-law," Thorn said, his voice low. "I'm sorry." Eli shook his head, the smoke from his derringer coiling around his hand. "He stopped being my brother-in-law the day he lied to me about my nephew's death," he said, his voice filled with a cold, hard finality. "He was a poison, and you don't apologize for cutting out a poison." The townsfolk who had been cowering behind tables and chairs slowly began to emerge, their faces a mixture of awe and morbid curiosity. They had witnessed the end of a legend, the death of a ghost, and they had seen the birth of a new and unlikely alliance. Abigail, her heart still pounding in her chest, leaned against the bar for support, her hand never leaving her belly. She had gambled everything on a lie, a desperate last-ditch effort to save the people she had come to care for. And it had worked. But the cost was still unknown. Thorn turned to her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something more than just gratitude. It was respect. "You saved us all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known." He then turned to the assembled crowd, his voice booming with the authority of his office. "This woman," he announced, his hand on Abigail's shoulder, "is under my protection. And so is her child. My child." The words hung in the air, a public declaration that would change the course of all their lives. He had claimed her and his son in front of the entire town. He had chosen honor over ambition, family over power. In the days that followed, a new sense of order settled over Redemption Gulch. The town, once a haven for outlaws and drifters, began to shed its lawless skin. Sheriff Thorn, a man transformed by the revelation of his past, ruled with a new sense of justice, a justice tempered with compassion. He made good on his promise to Abigail. He bought the small house next to Martha's and had it renovated, creating a comfortable and safe home for her and the baby. He visited her every day, their conversations awkward at first, but slowly, tentatively, they began to build a bridge across the chasm of their shared past. Eli, his heart heavy with the loss of the boy he had raised as his own, found solace in his work. But he was no longer just a blacksmith. He was a hero, a man who had faced down his demons and emerged victorious. He and Thorn, once rivals, now shared a bond forged in blood and betrayal, a bond that was stronger than any legal document. Cody, caught in the middle of this maelstrom of adult emotions, struggled to find his footing. He loved Eli, the man who had been his father, in every way that mattered, but he was also drawn to Thorn, the powerful, enigmatic man who was his biological father. It was Abigail who helped him navigate this new and confusing landscape. She spent hours with him, talking to him, listening to his fears and his hopes. She told him stories about his mother Rebecca, painting a picture of a woman who was full of life and love. And she helped him to see that it was possible to love two fathers, that his heart was big enough to hold them both. As the seasons changed, so did the lives of the people in Redemption Gulch. The harsh winter gave way to a vibrant spring, a symbol of the new life that was about to begin. One cool spring morning, with the scent of wildflowers in the air, Abigail went into labor. Martha and Thorn were by her side, their hands clasped in hers, their faces a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. After a long and difficult labor, a new cry echoed through the small house, a cry of life, a cry of hope. Abigail had given birth to a healthy baby boy. She held him in her arms, her heart overflowing with a love so fierce it took her breath away. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. He was a symbol of their shared past, their uncertain future, and the redemptive power of love. Thorn looked at his newborn son, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He had been given a second chance, a chance to be the father he should have been all along. He reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek, a silent promise passing between them. A few days later, the whole town gathered in the small church for the baby's christening. Eli stood as the godfather, his face beaming with pride. Martha, her eyes filled with tears of joy, held the baby as the pastor blessed him. They named him Gabriel, a name that meant, "God is my strength." It was a fitting name for a child who had been born out of so much turmoil, a child who represented the hope of a new beginning. After the ceremony, as the townsfolk gathered outside for a celebration, Thorn took Abigail's hand. "Marry me, Abigail," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Let me be a real father to our son. Let me be a husband to you." Abigail looked at him, at the man who had once been a stranger, a symbol of the law that had threatened to tear their lives apart. But he was also the man who had claimed her and her child, the man who had chosen honor over ambition. She looked at Eli, who was watching them with a smile on his face. She looked at Cody, who was playing with his new baby brother, his face alight with joy. And she looked at her son, her Gabriel, a symbol of the love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places. She knew that her life would never be simple. There would be challenges and heartaches, ghosts from the past, that would continue to haunt them. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. She had found a family, a home, a love that was stronger than any bullet, any lie, any betrayal. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, a smile blooming on her face. "Yes, I will marry you." The sun shone down on Redemption Gulch, a town that had finally lived up to its name. The dust of the past had settled, and in its place, a new and vibrant future was beginning to take root. A future built on the foundations of courage, forgiveness, and the enduring power of a love that had been forged in the heart of the wild, untamed West. And so the tale of Abigail Rose, a woman whose courage defied the harsh realities of the West, comes to a close. Her story is a testament to the fact that even in the dustiest corners of the world, where hope seems a distant mirage, the human spirit can triumph. From a desperate search for a phantom lover to a selfless act that unraveled a decade of deceit, Abigail's journey reminds us that true strength is often found in the most vulnerable of hearts. She not only shielded a child with her own body, but also brought a powerful man to his knees, forcing a reckoning that healed a fractured family and redeemed a town. If this story of love loss and redemption in the Wild West captured your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a tale of true grit. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas from history's most fascinating chapters. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story. What part of Abigail's journey moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below.